New logo, new music. We're still working out all the kinks. Welcome into Morning Invest, everyone. I'm Clayton Morris, longtime real estate investor turned entrepreneur, former news anchor, and I get to bring this show to you every day where we help you build financial intelligence so you can build financial freedom. This is the financial show for the average person, not the Wall Street type. So the things and stories that I think matter most to you and your family. We're going to be talking about the stimulus on today's show. We're going to be talking about the White House. And there's apparently a lot of fighting going on inside the White House right now over this stimulus. They felt that one member of the White House went rogue over the weekend. We brought you that story as breaking news on Saturday or late Friday, and so we were covering that story, but not a lot of other people were. A lot of mainstream news organizations kind of ignored it, and it went unnoticed. And frankly, it looked like part of the White House didn't even know what happened. We're going to bring you what's going on right now with this stimulus. One side wants a big amount of money. The other part of the White House looks like they don't. So we'll have an update on that. We're also going to be talking about the Main Street lending program rollout from the Federal Reserve. It turns out they're not so bulletproof after all. You know, everyone's praising Fed Chief Jerome Powell, myself included, but this Main Street lending program has been a disaster. We're going to get into the numbers on that and what it means for you as a small business owner if you're looking to get those loans. And finally, today we're going to talk about some of the numbers on the new stimulus. If you would qualify, who would qualify? Are you an 18-year-old college kid, 19-year? We're going to dive into all of those numbers based on the HEROES Act numbers. And Congress has been working through some of the details right now on this next stimulus, picking and pulling different pieces of the HEROES Act, it looks like, together with negotiations going on between Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. So who would qualify under the current framework that's sitting on the Senate's desk? We'll go through that today. But first, I want to start with the White House. The White House, folks, is a mess right now. The White House is a mess, and there appears to be a lot of infighting happening inside the White House. According to a big report from the Washington Post this morning, and others, there's been other stories that have now confirmed this. The White House doesn't know what it wants. And Congress is getting a little fed up with the White House because it's a little hard for them now to put together any kind of a stimulus package if they don't know what the White House wants. So let me bring this up to you. They're blaming one man. The White House is blaming one person right now for this whole kerfluffle. Why do we have this $2 trillion number that the White House wants? How did that get floated out there? And why did other members of the administration over the past few days start to sort of walk that back a little bit? Well, it started with this one man. And remember, I brought this story to you here on the show. Peter Navarro speaking to Maria Bartiromo in an interview that apparently no one watched inside the White House. But now they're saying he went rogue when he said all of this. Watch this.
For me and for this president, one of the key thrusts of any phase 4 and any economic plan going forward has to be manufacturing jobs, a focus on buy American, hire American, make it in the USA. What we need to do as a country is to make more stuff here. What'll that do? It'll simultaneously create more manufacturing jobs, which tend to pay much higher wages, and also help the ripple effect to create a lot of those service sector jobs, which we're going to lose to dislocation as we adjust. So the phase 4, you talk about a $3 trillion program by Nancy Pelosi. You hear from Mitch McConnell, only $1 trillion. The president is very interested in something on the order of at least $2 trillion, with a bulk of that focused on bringing home our manufacturing base, starting with.
No. Apparently, no. That's not accurate, according to White House sources today. Apparently, what they're saying is, White House sources are saying Navarro speaks for Navarro. One senior administration official said. Another official went on the record and said Peter Navarro went rogue. He did not have authorization to go out there and say anything of the sort. The White House is a mess. The White House doesn't know what the White House is doing. Now, as you know, on the show, I'm an equal opportunity offender. The other day, someone said, Clayton, you're a Trump guy. To which I said, how do you get that? How do you get where I am on any of this? What do I always try to call straight? I always try to be a straight shooter with you and call BS where I see it. So I think they're setting Navarro up to be a bit of a fall guy right now. The way I know Washington, look, I've covered these guys for years. They float these trial balloons out there to see how it's received. And it looks like congressional leaders don't want this $2 trillion price tag. And so now it's a way of sort of throwing Navarro under the bus. That's sort of my take on this. And I think you getting these White House sources that are going on the record saying, yeah, Navarro speaks for himself. You know, that Peter Navarro went rogue. So he goes out and does a full interview with Marito Bartiromo on one of their main money shows, and he talks about $2 trillion, and he says he was sort of needling Mitch McConnell with his $1 trillion plan. Remember, a few months ago, Mitch McConnell said anything we do on the next stimulus would be a maximum of $1 trillion. So Navarro says the president wants $2 trillion, but the real sticking point here is not even the price tag so much, because he's already started to walk this back. Navarro was asked about this yesterday, and he said, well, $2 trillion, $3 trillion, let's not talk about prices here. Let's really talk about what's in the bill. Oh, okay. That's very important, this price tag, by the way. So it appears to be walking that back. But what's really important is what's mentioned by Navarro on manufacturing. A lot of Republican leaders think that it's just a pipe dream, that you're going to have this Buy American program, that we're going to bring manufacturing back to the United States. I said it right here after he said it. That's not going to happen. I know it sounds great. It's a great slogan to put on a t-shirt and try to sell the American people. Buy American, manufacturing coming back to the United States. It's not happening. He said, though, Navarro went on to say, if there is anybody in this administration who is opposed to Buy American or strengthening the domestic manufacturing base, they're in the wrong administration, he said. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, on the other side, has been getting pressure from Congress. People worried that he is not too savvy when it comes to negotiating with members of Congress. And now there's a big push to possibly have Vice President Mike Pence take the helm of this next round of stimulus, where he can negotiate with members of Congress and get something through. I don't know if they're losing faith in Mnuchin's ability to negotiate. They're worried that he'll just give away the farm to Nancy Pelosi, that it would be too much, too rich of a stimulus package. So right now you have members of Congress saying, we don't know what this White House wants. You have Republican members of Congress saying, we don't know what this White House wants. Quoting, it's very hard for Congress to figure out this administration's priorities. Today it's about Mnuchin's agenda. Tomorrow it's Navarro's agenda. The next day it's the president's agenda. The next day it's Kudlow's agenda. They're all over the map. And they don't seem to be able to agree and get on the same page about what they want, which is very odd. For any piece of legislation to come out of a White House, to have there be this many disparate voices telling you what's in it. You didn't hear this during the George W. Bush administration. You didn't hear this during the Obama administration. You didn't hear this during the Clinton administration. When legislation comes out of the White House, there's a uniform approach to it. Everyone's on the same page. Not in the Trump White House. No one's on the same page with this. So, will Vice President Mike Pence take a larger role in all of this, stepping up now to head up the next round of stimulus phase 4? He's gotten praise for his handling of coronavirus internally inside the White House. There's also a lot of criticism about their handling of the coronavirus task force. So, Jim DeMint, though, Republican from South Carolina, former senator, stepping forward saying another bill pushing through Congress right now would be a disaster. A disaster. And that's what I've told the president. So you have Republicans in Congress, former members of Congress telling the White House, do not push another stimulus package through right now. Wait, you're spending too much money. So this $2 trillion price tag that we heard about from Peter Navarro, apparently it's not true. And apparently most congressional Republicans don't support Peter Navarro's efforts either. So let's talk about this manufacturing piece, because I find this fascinating. Because there's not support. Think about this. Republicans are not supportive in Congress of bringing our supply chain back from China to the United States. Quoting, said Brian Riedel. He's a policy analyst at libertarian-leaning Manhattan Institute and a former aide to Senator Rob Portman, who you know is floating his own stimulus package. Navarro's efforts have also typically been viewed skeptically by other senators and administration officials, such as Mnuchin himself and Jared Kushner. They're saying that Navarro has been using this stimulus debate to basically sneak in some of his favorite protectionist trade policies that are unlikely to pass on Capitol Hill. because these members of Congress don't want to have to go back to those businesses in their district and tell them that we're launching these new protectionist trade policies that would inhibit their ability to trade with China. Not going to happen. And also, our manufacturing is not coming back to the United States. I hate to break it to you. That ship has sailed. We might be able to have some assembly here in the United States, but broader-based manufacturing is not going to happen in the United States. It's simply not. That ship has sailed. We want cheaper televisions. There's no way you're going to find an American-made television in the future. If you do, it'll be 3 times the cost. I mean, look, we're partly to blame for this, aren't we? We wanted our cheaper Dell computers back in the day. We want our cheaper electronics. We want those things. And that's why the manufacturing has moved. And it's not coming back. It's not. So that's the latest from the White House. An absolute mess. Peter Navarro going rogue. I don't know if I buy that so much as I think that they're using him as a scapegoat right now. They sent out that trial balloon of $2 trillion and it fell flat among congressional members. So now this opens up a can of worms here. We know that there's going to be some sort of an infrastructure plan. We do know what we have heard from the president is a payroll tax cut. So if you are employed, you will, and the president even said this yesterday, within the past 24 hours, that Americans are going to be back fully employed. He said, under this next stimulus, I want you to be fully employed, okay? And you're going to be making more money in your paycheck because of a payroll tax cut. So those 2 things we know are true coming out from the White House. That is true. We've heard it from the president's lips. We've also heard from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. They want liability protection. And we know from the reporting that there appears to be this trade-off right now between Nancy Pelosi getting some of her state and local government assistance in trading to get this liability protection for businesses. So that, frankly, is all we know right now, because the White House is a mess trying to get some sort of a plan together, and congressional Republicans are getting frustrated because they don't know what page everyone is on inside that White House. And let's be honest, they are also under siege right now inside the White House. Huge Supreme Court decision in the last 24 hours on DACA. John Bolton book is hitting stands, and there's also all aides inside the White House saying that it's like panic time inside the White House. You're dealing with a pandemic. You're dealing with a Trump rally this weekend coming up here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You're hearing about coronavirus spiking cases now in Florida, could become the epicenter of coronavirus, and that's where the Republican National Convention is headed in Jacksonville. There's a lot on their plate. But the American people are struggling, and Americans right now are turning to the president and the White House and saying, get off your behind, get us something passed, get it over to Congress so we can get some next round of stimulus into the hands of the American people. So that's the very latest from the White House. I want to talk about the Federal Reserve now, because boy, have the Fed been bulletproof. It seemed like the Fed had been bulletproof, right? Jerome Powell had been out there on the front lines, getting money, liquidity into the hands of Wall Street and into big banks to make sure that mortgages could continue, that the American people would remain, that we could buy and sell houses, that these big companies would remain solvent. And so there's been a lot of praise, obviously, on Wall Street. You see that reflected in the numbers, how well they're doing, right? Wall Street's just doing fantastic thanks to the Federal Reserve. Well, now they don't appear to be so bulletproof, because the Main Street program that was set to roll out has been a bit of a disaster. And take a look at this. This is a front page story. The $600 billion program is off to a rocky start. That's not good news when you're on the front page, when you're on the front page of major financial newspapers. And this is sending Wall Street into a bit of a spin. Now, this is affecting specifically those small businesses who are trying to get access to that Main Street lending program. $600 billion in loans, folks, $600 billion that you'd be able to have access to, so that you could, interest-free, that you could get access to these loans for a long time, be able to do whatever you needed to do to buy, new equipment, hire people, keep people on payroll. And unlike the PPP program, this program specifically allows you to do anything you want with it. PPP, you had to use 60% for payroll and the other 40% for utilities, expenses, and so forth. And you had a certain amount of time in which to use it, and those were grants, so you don't have to pay those back. This is different. You'd have to pay these back. These are loans. But what the Federal Reserve is doing is they're going to take up to 95% of the burden of it. And you'd have to use a local bank, Wells Fargo, Chase. You go there and say, hi, I'd like to apply for the Main Street Lending Program. And they will set up the loan, and they will only have to shoulder 5% of the loan burden. The Fed will step in and take up the other 95% of it. That's how this works. Well, it's not working. The reason it's not working, there's many reasons why. Number one is that the banks aren't ready for it. And the banks really aren't showing any interest. So you have a lot of people, according to these reports, who are trying to get these loans at small banks, and a lot of the small banks right now aren't interested in being a part of this program. So if you're a small business owner right now trying to get access to this, I've reached out to a couple of our fintech small banks that I'm reaching out to see if they have this program available for you. And if they do, I'll update you here on the show so you can take advantage of this. During the PPP rollout, a lot of banks like Wells Fargo, Chase, and others were a disaster. They were only interested in their biggest clients and serving them on the PPP program. We heard from a lot of people who were really struggling to get their stuff pushed through from Wells Fargo, Chase, Bank of America, and others. And you were able to go to fintech companies. You were able to go to PayPal and others, and Novo Bank and online brokerages and things like that. And you were able to get your PPP program stuff within a few days. So is the same thing going to happen here? So again, I've reached out to a couple of our fintech partners, and I'm going to find out from them. If I get any update on that, I will report it to you here. So what this is aimed to do is you can use it for any expense, $600 billion you can use for any expense. Basically the Small Business Administration is handling this. This was supposed to be rolled out in March. It didn't. So that was the first disaster in this program. The second part of the problem is the Fed is concerned about losing money. So it's been slow to roll it out because what happens if they lend all of this money to these businesses and then these businesses go under and they collapse? Guess what? They're out of money then. And that's very possible, as we've seen across the country right now, all of these companies going out of business, even if they had access to PPP loans and grants. The Treasury has set aside $75 billion to cover any losses in the Main Street program, but the Fed is acting carefully because it's trying to see whether or not they potentially end up being able to give out these $600 billion in loans. You know, that's a lot of money, and they're walking very cautiously on this. Another problem is that the Fed hasn't published a list of banks that you can access. So it's leaving a lot of small business owners right now scrambling to find them. So these local small banks are not interested. So a lot of businesses, according to these reports, are reaching out to their local banks, and the local banks are saying, I don't even know anything about this. What is the Main Street Lending Program? Man. And if they do know about it, they'll say something like, oh yeah, I've heard about that, but we're not running any loans through here on that, no. Ouch. They're not doing it. And the other big problem is the big banks. So some of America's biggest banks right now, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, check this out. They haven't even set up their websites yet to handle it. They said they plan to participate, but this morning I checked on Wells Fargo's website. Take a look at this. This is Wells Fargo's page, and it just says we support it. It just says, you know, we see that it's popular, but they plan to participate, but they haven't updated their website. You can just see here they have like a PDF download on Wells Fargo's website that you can gain access to, but they haven't updated their websites for you to take advantage of it. So great, the mainstream lending program is available, but you can't get access to it, I guess. The other problem on this is the loan size. According to these reports, the minimum loan size for you to take out is $250,000, making it just too big for a lot of small businesses. Grover even agrees it's just too big. Don't you, buddy? What are you barking at over there? You're not barking? All right. You barked and then go back to sleep? Okay. Anyway, so $250,000 is a lot for a small business. They don't need that much. And so a lot of community bankers have urged the Fed to lower the minimum amount to $100,000. And businesses also have to submit a lot more paperwork to get a Main Street loan than they did with the PPP loan. The Main Street program was the PPP program was very, very simple. The Main Street program is much more complicated. So that's an update on the stimulus today. That is an update on your PPP program, the Main Street lending program, and what the White House is doing. I wanted to check in now and talk about who would get a payment under the next round of stimulus payments. Because as this HEROES Act sits on the desks of the Senate, we're hearing reports this week that that has become a bit of a framework between Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell to put all of this together and to get some sort of a stimulus package passed and out the door. So what would that look like? Well, the framework already exists, and many of you have been asking questions, very specific questions, like, well, how would I qualify? Like, what if I have my college student is home, he's 18 years old, I've got this person, he's a dependent. So I want to go through some of the numbers on who would qualify for a stimulus check under the current framework, which we are hearing reports is the basis, is some of the scaffolding of what would finally emerge. Now, this isn't final yet, but this is coming together, and this would be part of this. So, those who would qualify for this are low and middle income households. Low and middle income households, just like the original CARES Act. So under the HEROES Act, that's what this would look like. Single taxpayers, so single taxpayers with a maximum gross income of $75,000. $150,000 for married couples. So again, single taxpayers with maximum gross income of $75,000. $150,000 for married couples. Now, above the $75,000 limit, that would be phased out up to $98,000. So if you make more than $75,000, maybe you make $78,000, maybe you make $85,000, it would be phased out as it goes up that ladder up to $98,000. Anything above $98,000, you simply don't qualify. Very important. And then, of course, the same thing is true for married couples. That number is also up to $199,000. It goes from $150,000 up to $199,000, and it's phased out after there at $199,000. Children, this is a big one because this is different than it was under the CARES Act. This is much more generous under the HEROES Act. Children, including 17 and 18-year-olds, would receive $1,200 up to 3 children. Now, that's different, again, than the CARES Act because, as you'll recall, under the CARES Act, what a disaster that was. So many of you wrote to me and complained that you had filed, you went on the website, updated the amount of dependents that you had, let them know that you had dependents, and then they sent you the wrong amount. Now, you'll still receive that wrong amount or the difference in next year's tax return as a tax credit. Remember that the CARES Act was a tax credit for the 2020 calendar tax year. So when you file your taxes in 2021, if you didn't get any of those dependency payments that you were supposed to, that's when you can put that on the list, and then you'll get that as part of your refund. That's very important. But anyway, during the first CARES Act, it was only $500 per dependent. $500 per dependent. So this time, under the HEROES Act, or a version of that HEROES Act, we're hearing that the dependents would get up to $1,200. $1,200 per dependent under the HEROES Act. That's far more generous. And again, it would go up to 3 people. So it is possible, for a person in that household, family, to get up to $6,000 under the HEROES Act if this passes in its current framework. Also, Americans married to immigrants. Unlike the CARES Act, the HEROES Act would allow those spouses a stimulus check to American citizens who are married to immigrants without a Social Security number. It was very weird, and there was a couple of discrimination lawsuits that were filed actually as a result of that, where they were blocked. So if you're an American citizen and you were married to someone without a Social Security number, you didn't get a stimulus check. So again, there were a number of lawsuits filed facing discrimination against that very reason. If you're an American citizen, you should have access to that. Anyway, under the HEROES Act, they've remedied that. Now you would be able to get that. Also, children, including 17 and 18-year-olds, would receive this as well. So there was questions, well, if I'm in the first CARES Act, it was 16 years old. Now it's 17 and 18. Also, adult dependents. This is a big question many of you have had. Adult dependents would also receive the stimulus check. So there's a lot of folks here who watch our show who have said, have let me know in our comments, and please let me know in the comments today. Are you one of those? You're taking care of an adult individual who is perhaps disabled. Somebody said, I'm taking care of my son who's schizophrenic, lives at home with us. He's an adult. Under the CARES Act, he wouldn't have qualified. Under this framework, he will qualify. He will receive $1,200 under this framework if it's passed. So that's very important. That's a big distinction. So again, we are hearing reports that this is some of the framework that is being discussed right now between Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. going back and forth right now on this HEROES Act, what's sitting on the Senate's desk. Pieces of it are starting to be used as a framework going forward, including assistance for state and local governments. Now, that took up a huge portion of that $3 trillion HEROES Act that they passed. I don't know that it'll be that large, but there will be payments made, according to sources that are working in Mitch McConnell's office, that there would be direct payments going out to state and local governments. Again, California, New Jersey, New York, other big states that were hit really hard, but a lot of red states too. This is not just a blue state bailout, as some have tried to label it. It would also then cover this liability protection that Mitch McConnell wants. So there's been some back and forth on these pieces, and I think it is shaping up that we will see some form of this next round of direct stimulus. And again, from the White House has been pushing hard for this payroll tax cut. President Trump yesterday said the same thing, that he said we will get back to our same unemployment level, 3.5%. Now that is incredibly wishful thinking, don't you think? We're going to be back there at 3.5%. And he said your paycheck will be even bigger than before. Now, during the 2016 tax cuts, President Trump passed a payroll tax cut. And not a lot of Republicans were terribly on board with that. Because how do you pay for things when you don't have payroll taxes coming in? You know, there's a big way that the federal government makes money, and that's a big one. Do you raise gas taxes to make up for it? What do? You need revenue. And the White House, the federal government right now is running a massive $20 trillion deficit. And where are we going to come up with this money? So the White House wants some sort of a payroll tax cut. Not a lot of Republicans are on board with that. We will see. In fact, some Republicans are coming forward, Rob Portman and others, saying that we would like to see, as part of this next stimulus, some sort of deficit reduction as part of the stimulus package. Democrats are not going to support that, so that's probably a non-starter. But all of these different pieces are floating around. And if you watched my earlier story, if you didn't see it, you can click on the video below and check out the story that we did on the White House being a total mess. I think you'd find that interesting because the White House basically is on two different pages. Right now they're saying that Peter Navarro went there and went rogue with his plans for $2 trillion, that the White House actually doesn't want to spend $2 trillion, and they can't get on the same page. And Republican members of Congress are saying, what does the White House want? Let us know. So check out that video below, or right here is the video coming up next that you can check out as well. So my thanks to all of you for watching today. Please subscribe to the channel, leave some comments below. Let me know what you want to see in this next round of stimulus. And did you find today's show helpful? Let's check in with Grover one more time to say goodbye. Oh, fine, he went back to sleep. That's good. That's good, little buddy. So from my house to yours, from my 3-month-old mini pincher to yours, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for subscribing to the show.